Hello, everyone. I'm Mr. E,
And I am Dalton Mortimer, otherwise known as the Authenticator, here on the YouTubes.
and we are the Duality of Man. And today we're going to talk about a very serious topic, one that um, I hope you guys will listen to with the utmost seriousness and really take what we're going to say into account. We're going to be talking about men and suicide. This is a very serious issue, and I personally have known some people who have unfortunately made the decision to take their own lives.
Uh-huh. And I have as well. And yeah. Be warned, guys, given that this is a show on men's rights and or men's issues in the modern zeitgeist, there will very rarely, if ever, be a topic that is lighthearted, but in particular this one is a doozy, so be warned, this is a heavy subject matter.
I have included the phone number for the suicide prevention hotline. So if anybody's listening to this, feel that they need to call and talk to somebody, the number is in the description.
Yeah. Yeah,
Now,
please do. I know I've had certain thoughts in that vein myself, and I know what it feels like to feel like you'll never amount to anything, no one will ever care about you, so on and so forth, and the pain is just too much. I get that. Believe me, I get that. There are days where I barely even have the energy to get out of bed. But if it is possible to do something, please at least avail yourself of the resources first and then take it from there. Um,
right, I have statistics from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and it says that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, which is really, really sad that so many people decide that they have no other option, no other way out of their problems than to take their own lives.
yeah, and a large part of that I think also is the stigma around mental health, especially severe mental health. And in particular, there's a narrative that I absolutely hate that says someone who commits suicide is looking for the easy way out or doesn't want to own up to their problems or what have you. And honestly, that rhetoric just pisses me right the hell off, like into like nuke the entire planet levels of anger because there is no such thing as taking more responsibility than the responsibility for your own life. I'm sorry. It,
Not only
it,
that, not only that, but I think it's more of they don't see a way out. Like a way, if they saw a way out, even if it was hard, I'm sure that they would necessarily prefer
yeah,
that
it's
than.
it's usually it's usually the last alternative that they come to, mostly because even even damaged people have a sense of self-preservation. Nobody wants to be irrelevant to the grand narrative of humanity. Like everyone wants on some level to leave a mark on other people or the world in the form of like their own life accomplishments or their children or what have you. So to get into such a headspace where the effort to make that impact or to at least try to make that impact is so overwhelming or so impossible to so Herculean in its need to accomplish it, that suicide becomes the better option. Or alternatively, a lot of people in their final moments will cite suffering, whether it's physical, emotional, or some combination of the two, that was so severe it was like I just can't cope with this. And um not saying therefore suicide is a good idea. Again, please, if you're feeling in this headspace, avail yourself of the resources. as ever possible. But I I think also there's this stigma that anyone who commits suicide is by definition irrational. And usually the justification for suicide is not some kind of existential ennui. I am in so much pain, whether it's physical or emotional, um, or existential or whatever, that I just can't cope with it anymore, and it's preferable to end the suffering than to continue on in a state where I know no one is going to help me and no one is going to care. Um, and incidentally, all you people who judge suicidal people, do you think you are helping by saying that their desire to commit suicide makes them an inferior person? Because very often it's the feeling of being inferior to begin with that is the cause of suicide. If you believe, you're worthless, you're shit, you'll never amount to anything, no one will ever love you, yada, 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 then it becomes a rational, not necessarily preferable, but rational decision to go, if I'm never going to have a positive impact and my life only seems to have a negative impact on everyone around me, then the best thing I can do for myself and the world is to end my suffering and also end the suffering of people who have to deal with me. And in fact, in a lot of ways, there's a altruistic side to suicide that I don't think ever gets brought up, in that a lot of times it's not only their own pain that people who commit suicide are trying to stop, it's the pain of others having to deal with them. Because a lot of times when you get severe depression or severe mental disorders or what have you, um, you get this uncomfortable feeling that you are a burden on the people who you have to rely on in order to cope with that pain. And if and you suddenly become transfixed by the idea that what if my net um what if my net impact on the world is a negative one? What if I actually cause people unnecessary pain just by being a presence in their life? Surely the most selfless thing I can do then is not to continually inflict myself and my pain onto other people, but to eliminate the variable of my pain and my suffering from other people's lives so they no longer have to deal with it.
Yeah, I've heard stories like that where people feel that they're doing nothing but dragging people down in life. So maybe by dying, that they'll either set them free, make them happier, or that
Lighten the load, at least, yeah.
or that their death will have some sort of benefit for the other person, inheritance or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, if anybody that I cared about thought that way, I'd rather have them in my life than $100 million.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going back to these statistics, in 2019, there were an estimated 1.38 million suicide attempts. However, it said 47,511 Americans died of suicide. So there were almost 1.4 million attempts, but a little less than 50,000 deaths due to suicide.
Yeah, and here's the other, and this is one of those things that I'm going to have to say that's not going to win me any favors here, but a lot of times when you talk about suicide as a men's issue, you'll get a bunch of people going, well, women attempt suicide more often than men do. So it's clearly a women's issue and not a men's issue, or a overall human issue and not a men's issue. But the thing of it is, attempted but uncompleted suicides, and again, this is one of those things I'm going to have to say because it's true, that isn't going to make me particularly popular with anyone, but a lot of times suicide attempts that are not completed are done for attention or histrionic satisfaction. And so I find the problem of completed suicides more pressing than attempted suicides, not just because the person survives, obviously, but also because there is that element of, if you attempt suicide in a way that you know is going to be ineffective, but is at least dramatic or emotionally satisfying, then in some ways you're appropriating the sympathy that should be going towards people who would genuinely attempt and succeed at suicide.
Wouldn't that be a form of Munchausen syndrome, where you fake being sick in order to gain sympathy and attention?
I mean, it can be, but I'm also going to allow for the fact that some people can be emotionally vulnerable enough that they can do such things without realizing they're doing it for attention, or without intending to do it for attention, even if that is their genuine motive. So it's going to be one of those things where, yes, I'm certain there are a bunch of people who have Munchausen type syndromes or hypochondria who would do so primarily for attention, um, on some level knowingly. But I'm also willing to believe there are plenty of people who feel emotionally devastated genuinely, who engage in suicidal behavior in an incompetent way and don't realize that they're doing it mostly for the emotional validation of victimhood. Um, it's still a problem because there are genuine victims of suicide, and genuine victims of the circumstances leading to suicide, because, as we previously went over, suicide is often a desperation move, a saint of last resort for people that are already in terrible, horrible circumstances, so much that they would rather end their existence than, or effectively end their existence than, endure the pain any further.
Now, we have another statistic that the rate of suicide is highest in middle-aged white men. Why do you think that is?
Well, and again, something I'm going to have to say that I don't think is going to win me any favors here. Um, Part of it, not saying a massive part, or a massively contributing part, but I would imagine at least some of it comes from the rhetoric that middle-aged white men are supposed to be privileged and at the top of their game. Because if you are told from an early age that life is set up to be easy for you, that you have all the advantages and that you have necessary um, all the necessary advantages you could possibly ever want, and you still fail, or still fall into a depression, or still feel unfulfilled, well then, what are you supposed to do? If you're told from an early age that you are underprivileged and that you lack certain um, privileges that would make your life better, then you can at least on some level chalk it up to, well, this is partly due to the resources I don't have, or the resources that would make me happy if I had them. But if you're told from an early age that you have everything and that life cannot get better for you because you already have every advantage every advantage in the book, and you still fail or you still fall short, well then, if you're given every advantage and you still fail, the problem therefore must be with you, right? And that feeling of, I had every advantage in the book and I still managed to come up short, is, I think, would justifiably horrify a bunch of people. The middle, the peasant from the Middle Ages can at least say, well, I'm not royalty, but the king from the Middle Ages, who still feels unfulfilled, um, naturally is up a creek without a paddle. And if you're erroneously told that you have privileges that you don't have, but you still believe that you have those privileges, if you are a medieval peasant and you're told to regard yourself as a medieval king, then that's even more horrifying, because you're assuming you have privileges you don't have, and then taking the responsibility of someone with those privileges without actually having them.
I think it's a bit more than that. That's definitely a factor, but I
Yeah,
also
I
see,
agree. That's just one that I don't feel gets talked about enough. So I thought we'd at least get that out of the way first.
I think it's also, you know, throw a dart at any issue, and you'll find people blaming white men for it as if they have the power to manipulate the cosmos in order to, you know,
And,
determine the
and
fate of billions of people.
and also ignoring a fuck ton of issues that do either explicitly or uniquely affect those men, um, and never getting any help or assistance for it. And this is going to bring us into a little bit of a sidebar that I did want to discuss here. One of the reasons, or one of the factors for suicide, I think, is actually partly how our culture attempts to deal with the problem of suicidality. Um, because when you feel suicidal, everyone and their mother, including us a little bit earlier in the show, say seek psychological help. But unfortunately, the psychological establishment currently, um, for example, the American Psychological Association released a report not too long ago, or an addendum or whatever, saying that social workers and psychologists um, were supposed to interact with boys and men, and help them through their problems by explaining to them the theory of toxic masculinity or the theory of hegemonic masculinity and all those other social justice influence theories. Well, if you are in a vulnerable mental state such that you want to go to a psychologist, and the psychologist basically says, um, you feel this way because you are fundamentally psychologically broken, and the only way um, to cure you of this feeling that you have is to further undermine your self-worth and your self-identity.
Oh, that is
Uh,
a terrible way to deal with it. You're contemplating taking your own life. Let me tell you how you're a bad person.
yes, you feel that you are an undue burden on civilization or the people we care about. Well, let me confirm for you that you are an undue burden on the people you care about, and more importantly, you're an undue burden on the people you care about because you feel this way. That's totally not going to completely destroy whatever remaining self-worth a person has in this instance.
I think this topic of suicide could also relate to something that we talked about last time.
Yeah, the
Talked about
homelessness
men in
issue.
abusive relationships, how
Hmm.
they don't have a lot of support, and if you're in an abusive relationship and there's nowhere that you can
Yeah,
go. I mean,
or you go to the place that society tells you to go. Social workers, psychologists, all that business, and they tell you your abuser is right to hate you, and you are indulgent and grandiose and egotistical for wanting a sense of self-worth. Well, then again, that's going to do nothing but exasperate and maybe even cause, to a certain extent, the problem. Because I do wonder how many people, how many men go to a psychologist for something like generalized anxiety disorder, and they get erroneously um, diagnosed with something like um, narcissism, borderline, or sociopathy because they have um, a different socio-political or philosophical paradigm. Like if someone who is an anti-social justice advocate goes to a psychologist, and then the psychologist, the feminist trained psychologist, cues in on the fact that a person has these anti-social justice type beliefs. How many of those men do you suppose are told to fixate on the fact that they have those beliefs and that those beliefs themselves are a sign of toxicity or the sign of them being either a narcissist, a sociopath, or a borderline. And what do you suppose that would probably do to someone's self-respect if they're told your beliefs are a sign that you're a bad person, and the only way to be a good person is to forego any sense of self-worth that you derived from those beliefs? That may well also be a contributing factor of people going to psychologists for other reasons, like generalized anxiety or midlife crisis or that sort of thing, and told that self-respect you have, it's disproportional and it makes you grandiose and it means you're actually a narcissist. It doesn't matter how many good arguments you have against this ideology is the correct answer, and if you oppose it, that means you're a bad person.
Let's see. It says white males accounted for 69.38% of suicide deaths in 2019. That's a big margin.
Honestly, I'm a little surprised it's not higher, if I'm entirely honest.
I don't know. I mean, we don't have the numbers for 2020 right now. Considering the lockdown and how that affected people's mental health, it could very well be higher.
Isolation is another topic we're going to have to cover, I think, one of these days or one of these weeks, because every piece of data we have on physiological and social isolation, and the like medical effects of psychological and physiological isolation on people suggest that any underlying conditions any person might have will be made worse by being physiologically and sociologically isolated. And the pandemic did nothing but shit a profound pile of making this infinitely worse.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the exact statistics, but I do know that suicide rates rose during the pandemic. And I remember one very sad story about a teenage boy who killed himself because he just could not stand being in lockdown.
And it also is worth noting that a lot of times people, and in particular men, will throw themselves into their ability to do things to take their mind off of any sort of negative emotionality or existential feelings they have. Like a person who is depressed might hyper-focus on work or might hyper-focus on family to take their mind off of the fact that they're depressed and engage in what psychologists refer to as sublimation in order to distract themselves from it. But if your mechanism for sublimation, your job, your social life, your family life, your friends and acquaintances are all unavailable to you or extremely difficult to get to because of an external force like COVID lockdowns, then all of a sudden you're left to do nothing but fester on those negative emotions you were trying to compensate for by working really hard or being very social with your friends and so on.
I mean, I certainly did that. When I was locked down in New Orleans, basically all I did was sleep and play video games.
Well, I mean, at least you found something in order to do, because I'm sure there are men who have tried that and have found themselves to be insomniac or who find the video games not distracting enough. Not to mention all the men who probably, and people in general, who turned to substance abuse, whether it's alcohol or weed or whatever else. Although I will put an asterisk on the weed thing because, as far as we know, weed doesn't have most of the negative addictive qualities of other substances. So just throwing that out there if anyone is unsettled by me bringing up weed there. But yeah, so many men, I'm sure, needed a drink and found themselves after 6 months, engaging in alcoholism because they needed a drink to take their mind off of the of the loneliness or the isolation, and then found themselves going through a couple bottles a week or something. And that probably didn't help any underlying depression or suicidality they might have had.
Yeah, I mean, human beings are social creatures. We're not meant to be isolated and on our own all the time. I mean, even introverts want they like, at the very least, having the option of when they want to going out and being with
Yeah,
friends.
the introversion needs to be a choice, and if they've done studies that show even if you take someone who's more introverted and you lock them in what is effectively solitary confinement, even if their other needs are met, their basic food and shelter and resource needs are met, they'll still go nuts. And this brings to mind a very old psychological experiment called Harlow's monkeys for me, and I think I've mentioned Harlow's monkeys on this show before, just because I think it is so indicative of like the instinctual need of humans, even more isolated and schizoid humans, to be social. And that is, they gave two they gave two monkey infants two different mothers, two different surrogate mothers, one of which was designed for comfort, and the other of which was designed to be terrifying, but to have um, access to food. And what they found was the monkeys, given the choice, spent so much time with the nurturing, comforting mother figure that they starved to death because the nurturing, comforting mother figure didn't um, have any food resource, and the one that did have the food resource was um, supposed to be deliberately terrifying.
Right. We have some statistics on suicide rate by age. Uh, what I have here, 15 to 24, is the lowest age range of likelihood for suicide, with 45 to 54 being the highest. I mean, that tracks
Mm.
with the middle age thing. Um,
Yeah, the data that we previously cited. Yep.
yeah, it appears the two highest is 55 to 64 and 45 to 54. So 45 to 64 is the highest age range for suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Another
what,
another fact another factor that I think might be worth talking about with the middle-aged and later life suicides is um, much of male self-worth is tied to accomplishment. So if you're getting to a point in your life where all of your major accomplishments have been done and you find those underwhelming or unsatisfying, but you're still told from an early age that men are valued by their achievements and by their deeds. If you haven't done enough, or by your own standards haven't done enough, that could also be extremely unsettling. Because when you're young, when you're in your 20s, you can even it out by saying, "Well, I'm only in my 20s. I've still got time and energy to accomplish things later." Um, if you get to that later and you still find yourself underwhelming or unsatisfactory, then there's only so much later you have at that point.
I
If you
think it
come to the
also could be
conclusion
the
of
factor
my
that
life is ending soon and I'm still unsatisfactory as a man, then suicide.
I think it could be a factor that there are people who throw their whole lives into their jobs, and once they reach the peak of their career or they go where they want to go, eventually they retire, and then yet they have to wonder what do they have to live for now? What gets them up in the morning? Before it was their work,
Yeah,
and now that's gone.
yeah. And also there's the high preponderance of men who, despite every ambition to become the big CEO type, they only ever get stuck in middle management. And again, if you throw every ounce of your life and your energy into work and you don't go as far in your work as you wish you did, like you don't get the nice corner office or the six-figure income or the family that can take a trip to Aruba whenever they want or wherever, and you realize I'm 50 or 60 and I'm still in the in the cubicle farm portion of the company, and I'm never going to get promoted to where I need to get in my lifetime, that too can be yet another case of I threw everything I had at this and it still wasn't enough. And I was told from an early age that I'm supposed to achieve things. So, where do I go from here?
Now, one thing that we didn't mention is divorce. I know that divorces can be extremely difficult, painful processes, and especially when kids are involved. And some men, even if they were good fathers, even if they did love their children, they lose custody and are unable to see them.
Mm-hmm. And for further elaboration on this particular issue, we have a show that we've already done. We actually have two shows, one on the prospect of courtship and marriage, and one on divorce and custody battles and so on, that are worth noting if you want a more in-depth examination of this particular topic. But yes, if you throw if you're if the thing that gets you up in the morning is I've got to go to work because I need to provide for my wife and my kids and my family, and then you lose your wife and your kids and your family despite working your ass off for them, or in a lot of cases even because you work your ass off for them because the wife finds the lack of emotionality in the relationship to be unsatisfying, i.e., you're working all the time, you don't have time for me, dot dot dot. Maybe we should get a divorce. Um, if you find yourself in that situation, then what is left? What is left to give your life meaning at that point? If you bet everything, if you bet your entire life's purpose on I am a good father because I work my ass off every day to provide for my kids and my family, and then the kids and the family are no longer a thing, and maybe now you even have to fight for them in a legal sense because the wife is making the divorce extremely difficult or extremely vindictive, that might also be something that tips you over the edge.
I think in order to solve that, we're going to need a reformation in the courts regarding divorce law, because I feel that, if the judge can see that the wife is being extremely callous towards her husband in the process, if she does not care about the state of her children's father, what state he'll be left in after this whole thing is over, I don't think that person would have the best interest of the kids at heart.
Mm-hmm. And then of course, to tie this back to basically everything we've talked about previously, because and this is the fascinating thing about all of these men's issues is when you get right down to it, they're all sort of interrelated and interconnected. Um, the suicide population among the homeless is, of course, ludicrously disproportionately high. And in fact, a lot of people who are homeless are people who have failed to, at some point prior to this, commit suicide because of their suffering.
I mean, that doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, a lot of people were suffering even when they had resources. I mean, these people don't even have a roof over their heads.
Yeah, and again, there's also this suicide and homelessness are sort of the both sides of the coin, because if you do have the self-worth and the self-respect to not commit suicide or to not break down and commit suicide, then there's a high preponderance of the possibility that if you find yourself in a similar situation as a lot of people who do commit suicide, that you'll wind up homeless because of all of the issues we went into last show on that particular issue.
Now, one thing that I want to show is that the rate of suicide between 18 to 24 and 25 to 34 actually jumps significantly. I feel it's because when you're 18 to 24, you're not taking life all that seriously. You believe that you have time to figure things out, sort your stuff out, figure out what you want to do. But by 25 to 34, I feel like if you still find that you're lacking purpose
If you
in
still
life,
don't have it all figured out, then not only is that a problem for you in particular, but there's a lot of external social pressure that says, you know, you can have fun with your 20s, you can be a little bit reckless with your 20s, but if you hit 30 and you haven't got life sort of sorted out or figured out already, then you're a loser, an incel, a person who, is on the computer all day in his mother's basement, all that nonsense. Um, and I personally have dealt with this recently because I recently turned 26 on July 25th, and I've because of my disability, on top of everything else, I've always been somewhat cognizant of the fact that I have less time than even most people do. And now I find myself at 26 thinking most people are supposed to have this all sorted out by the time they're 30, and I still have virtually no idea what I'm doing with my life. Um, and the clock is ticking. Add to that the fact also that my body, again because of my disability, is going to likely be racked with all sorts of aches and pains a lot quicker than most people's. And 30 for me is basically 45 or 50 for most other people. And I often think to myself, I'm running out of time. I still haven't done anything. I still haven't made an impact. I still haven't um I still haven't found my place in the world, and I don't want to do a meaningless like cubicle job, but also at the same time it's getting to the point where it's either that or complete irrelevance, and it's it can be very horrifying. And I'm not saying I'm not playing the victim because of my disability or anything. I'm just saying I have a lot of factors that other people have, and also these other few things that kind of add to the pressure. But I can totally understand someone in their late 20s and early 30s, even without that, going, everything I've ever been taught, every TV show I've ever watched, every um, male role model or female role model I've ever had has always said, you know, you're young, you can still play around with your teens and your 20s, but by the time you hit 30, you're supposed to be on your way at least to the suburban white picket fence, 2 kids and a wife thing, or some variation on that. And if you're coming up on your 30s or in your 30s and you're still not there, if you're still kind of wondering when is my ship going to come in, um when is my moment going to arrive, when am I going to get the windfall that's going to propel me to the rest of my life? If you're still wondering that, then the clock starts ticking a little bit louder because as your youth fades away, you find even things that used to be easy are now hard. And if you're still in a space where you don't really know how that works, then you're running out of time, is effectively the feeling, it seems.
I mean, I feel like I'm in a very similar boat. Not so much with the physical disability like you, but it's like I'm 29. Next year, I'm going to be 30 years old, and I would like to be, married, wife, kids. I'd like that. I mean, I've always wanted to be a dad someday. I mean, I've known that since I was 10 years old,
Mm-hmm.
but it still seems like a very far away prospect. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm still single right now, even though I would like to be in a relationship. It's just dating is hard, and if you don't believe me, check out our very first episode.
Yeah, that whole, and again, a lot of these issues are interrelated and are interconnected. But I think irrespective of any other issues that might affect you as a person, in our generation in particular, in the millennial and Zoomer generation, we were always taught that by the time you're 30, you'll have changed, you'll have grown up, you'll have become the person you're going to be for the rest of your life. So enjoy your 20s while they last, or enjoy your teens while they last, and and find a way to sort everything out in that time frame. But I think for a lot of people, the in our generation at least, the idea of adulthood, the idea of like the suburban dad, the Hal from Malcolm in the Middle, the Homer Simpsons, all that stuff. That might be the overall ideal, but nobody really explained how we're supposed to get from the young, idealistic 20-something to that, established man with a job and a home and a family and a career, in the space of basically your late 20s, or a little bit more after that.
I mean, for me, what really clicked for me was when I actually saw my niece for the first time. I mean,
Uh,
I was bouncing around from place to place a lot, but
mhm.
after I came back to Pennsylvania from New Orleans, because it's almost impossible to make a living down there with the pandemic going on.
Yeah.
While I was down there, my sister had a child, a little girl, and then when I heard my niece for the first time, it was like a flip switched in my mind. He's like, this person is going to be looking to me for advice, for guidance, uh, as an example of what to be. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't afford to be
Whether I
around them.
realize it or not, I'm effectively the adult in the room now.
Yes. And I also realized that this is what I want out of life, and that everything else, job, that's just a means to an end. But this is what I want out of my life.
Hmm. I had a similar thing when my middle brother, who's like I believe 19 now, when he started dating in high school at like 17. I had this weird moment of like, I don't remember doing that when I was his age. I don't remember doing that when I was 17. Although in my defense, um, I actually graduated at 17 because I started school a year early because my birthday is in the summer, and our state let you do that sometimes. Um, and then for most of that period in my life, I was um, going to college, and of course that didn't work out because of anxieties and effectively burnout. But um, it did sort of suddenly hit me that like, wait a minute. My brother started dating in high school, like most people tend to do. I didn't do that because I found most of the people in my high school to be vapid and annoying. But now I'm in my mid 20s, or in this case now, I guess late 20s, and I still have never had a physical relationship, let alone someday finding someone I can have kids with. Um, which has been on my mind a lot recently of like, when I find someone, I'm hoping that it's going to be someone that I can at least talk about the idea of finding a surrogate for, because for those that don't know, I prefer guys. But if I was to have kids, I would prefer that kid be biologically connected to me because that's how evolution works. If you don't fuck and produce offspring, at some point you are kind of an evolutionary failure, and I don't want to be an evolutionary failure. Um,
I
both for
think,
myself and my kid. I don't want um my kid to think to himself, my dad is a loser who never amounted to anything. If I ever have kids.
I mean, I think one thing that another problem that people have within the same range is regret. By this age, you've done enough to accumulate a good number of mistakes or things that you wish that you could have gone over and done differently. I
Yeah.
know certainly I have. And
If I had it to do over again, it's a soundtrack I hear in my head most days. Actually, I have this feeling of like if I could just go back to when I was 15, or I could just go back to when I was first starting high school, knowing what I know now, um, then it could all be good. It could all be better. I know what to do this time. I'd not alienate the people that because I find a lot of my regrets with that is um, even though I found high school to be vapid and annoying, and most of people's social preoccupations were shallow and childish, in my opinion, I do go back and I think to myself, if I had just been a little bit more open to being social, if I had just been more um, tolerant of people's stupidity, then I wouldn't have this guilt of all these people who I've mistreated, all these friends who I've lost potential to be friends with because I was such a loner. I was such a I thought I knew better, and both now and at the time, I still think my way of doing things was probably in the long term better, but in the short term, I was a standoffish brat um who treated people like shit, and I often wonder if I had just not done that, if I had just been more conscious of long term consequences in regards to that part, then maybe I wouldn't feel as guilty and as worthless now. But unfortunately, that ship appears to have sailed well and truly.
yeah, I mean, there's also a lot of stuff that I lament doing in high school. I mean, if current me met the me from high school, I'd probably kick my own ass.
Yeah, there's so much like yeah, I I I would have. There's so much advice I wish I could give to 15 or 17-year-old me. Um, one of the first of which, in my case, I think would um, be a little bit less paranoid about coming out, because that was another thing. In high school, I definitely wasn't out. And in my immediate local social circle, I'm still not technically out, but part of me does often wonder if I had been not only if I had been nicer to that guy I ended up liking, but also if I just came out to a couple of the guys who I liked or who I liked from afar in high school, would it really would the possibility of them hating me really be worse than the feeling now of, well, now it's too late, even if I wanted to say, I like you, please, I don't want you to be grossed out, but I like guys, and I just want you to know I find you extremely attractive. If I had said that, or I had said some variation on that when I was 17 or 16 or whenever, um, would I at least be closer in terms of friendships with those people that I ended up liking, instead of thinking to myself, um, I missed the boat and I was too late, and now most of them probably don't even remember me, let alone would be open to the idea of liking me that way.
Yeah,
Ugh.
I mean, I definitely have feelings similar to that. Um,
Mhm.
there were two girls uh, from when I was in college, and they were absolutely fantastic. I mean, these girls were everything I didn't realize that I actually wanted at the time.
Mhm.
And if I knew now what I knew back then, there is no way I would let either one of them slip through my fingers
Right.
like I did with
Yeah,
them.
and I have the same thing with a lot of the guys that I liked in high school. In particular, there was one guy, and he is probably my gold standard for men. Full stop. Um, when I was a very little kid, um, partially because of my disability and partially just because I was kind of a loner. Um, Oftentimes when people would try to be nice to me, it would come off as manipulative because when you're a disabled kid, people are often very over the top saccharine nice to you in a fake sort of way, and you get paranoid about whether someone is being nice to you because they genuinely like you and want to be near you and want to be around you, or whether they're being air quotes nice to you because they find you to be the weak, inferior, crippled kid who you basically can treat like a pet or a toddler all the time. Um, and one of the guys who I ended up liking in high school was the star athlete in both elementary school and high school. Um, he tried, I think, a couple of times to reach out to me, but he was so well liked by so many people in such a superficial way, um, that it came off to me like he was just trying to manipulate me. And if I could just go back to that period of my life and smack the shit out of 5-year-old me and tell him, no, trust me, this one's gold. He's going to become one of the most amazing people you will ever come to know, and you will never get another chance with someone like this again. Be nice to the kid. Um, if I could just have that, I think I'd be a much more well-adjusted person because a lot of my anxiety comes from guilt over stuff like that, of me being a standoffish loner when I should have just taken the hint and been nice, or at least superficially nice, and then I could have at least had the opportunity to um, get closer on a more real um, metric.
Yeah, I think me, you, and a lot of other people that feel this way, at some point we have to forgive ourselves for our mistakes. There was no way we could have known at the time.
Yeah, but the problem, of course, is it's so obvious in retrospect, and in some cases it was even kind of obvious at the time. Um, that it becomes kind of a like, we can say we didn't know and we can say we didn't have any way of knowing, but at least for me, my biggest problem is I'll be in two minds on something or someone, where like one side of my brain will be telling me, you know, no, this person is being an asshole, ditch them, tell them to fuck off, and then the other half of my brain will be saying, but maybe they're just not, maybe they're trying but they just don't know how to read you or know what you're looking for. um and then of course the other side tends to be right whenever I make that decision, and then it's like, well, on some level I knew, so why was I stupid enough to not listen to my own instincts?
Okay, we're almost at an hour here. What advice would you give to prevent someone from contemplating suicide? Like somebody is thinking about it, they come to you. What advice would you give them? Would you give them to
um
get away from that path?
it depends on the reasons that they have for wanting to commit suicide. Um, if it's a case of you're in, if you're in a lot of pain, if you're genuinely just making the calculation of I would rather die than be in this much pain, um, I can't offer you much advice apart from seek someone you can trust who is going to be there for you and um, who is willing to put up with at least some of the baggage, because that, again, the one thing that I would tell my younger self is those people do exist. Those people who genuinely do care about you and want to see the best for you and want your presence in their life. Um, the other thing is, I would say make sure if you're thinking about doing that. This is a little bit of homework I have for anyone who is genuinely thinking about committing suicide. Because, and again, I can say this because I frequently have these moments of this mentality. If you can't find any rational reason to stick around, just think of it this way. The world is not going to remember you if you don't do something to make yourself memorable. So before you end it all, before you let it all go, make sure at the very least that you're going to leave a mark. And maybe in the process of looking for a way to leave a mark, whether it's through art, through having a child, through a relationship, through something, you'll find a reason to not only leave a mark, but also um, maybe a reason to stick around full stop. Because a lot of the time, what gets me into that mindset is the idea of my impact on this world is either non-existent or negligible, or it's principally negative. So if those two things are what motivates you to want to commit suicide, then the only solution for you on a rational terms, and I'm not gonna try to appeal to you on emotional terms, because if you're anything like me, you hate emotional arguments, and this is exactly how you get in this headspace to begin with. Of I need to know I have a practical, rational impact on the world, and if I don't have it, then what's the point? Um, but if you're like that kind of person, if you are hyper rational to the point of not even caring about your own self preservation a lot of the time, then make sure you leave that rational legacy, and maybe in the process of looking for a means to leave that objective rational legacy, you'll maybe find that being you isn't so bad, and you might want to continue. That's the best answer I can come up with right now, because that's most of what keeps me centered when I get in that mindset of I have work to do, is basically the way I talk myself out of it. I can't leave yet because I have too much shit I need to accomplish first, because I'm not going to leave this world without someone knowing and caring that I was actually here. That's my out, I guess.
The advice I would give um, to men who, yeah, after they've accomplished their purpose in job or in life and don't know why they want to get up, my advice would be to pick a skill, a hobby, something that you find interesting, and seek to master it, whatever it is. Maybe it's an instrument, maybe it's something like woodworking, but it will give you purpose. You can measure your progress, and when you get really good at it, people will recognize that and they
Yeah.
will respect you for the skill that you have acquired.
And more to the point, when you're looking for social networking, or for people for a support system, find people who will respect those things. If your friends, if your erstwhile loved ones can look at you developing skills and not be satisfied with that, then you need to seek other friends, because one of the things that gets people down, and I know this because I get a lot of this too, is people just not understanding you can very much be one of those things, that gets you into that mindset in the first place of no one is ever going to get me, so I might as well just leave because no one's ever going to care or get me. Um, but there are people, especially now in the age of the internet, in the age of social media, who will get you, who will look at the skills you're developing or the objective merits of your personality and care about those things. So step one is, like E said, um, there's always room to develop another new skill or another new talent. Because even if you are like me and you find yourself existentially worthless, there is objective value in people with skills. So even if you personally are not worthwhile, the skills and talents and things you develop definitely are objectively valuable. And you can find people who operate on the metric of so good I can't ignore them, which is another. There's a really good book that I find useful in this situation called "So Good They Can't Ignore You." It's about essentially what Mr. E was talking about, developing skills so that even if you feel existentially worthless, you can still feel objectively valuable because you have a certain set of skills. So if you find yourself to be worthless, if you find yourself to be a drag on existence, figure out what you find objectively worthwhile and then develop skills at that thing. Because if you're good enough, your own lack of worth won't matter. People will respond to your skills and your merits.
For people who are having a difficult time finding someone, my only advice is that dating for men is basically like a shotgun blast. The more buckshot you let out, the better your chances of hitting something.
Mm-hmm.
It really,
And
it really is a numbers game for men. I mean, women can afford to be more choosy because they're the ones who get asked, and also the disproportionate number of men to women
yeah.
in dating.
And also women are the deciders as to what's socially valuable, so that helps. But there are women who, like E and I were just saying, will also respond to the so good I can't ignore you metric. And the other thing is, sometimes the women who are worth your time don't look it on the surface, but when you get to know them, when you actually get to know their personalities, they become worthwhile. In particular, I would highly recommend as a resource for men looking for women who get them, a channel called Honey Badger Radio, which is a channel run by women who are men's rights advocates, and other masculinized women who will view it not quite from the feminine hypergamous perspective. So if you can find a woman like that, like a woman like Karen Strawn or Alison Tiemann, who are unfortunately for the rest of us both taken, but if you can find someone like that, that's the kind of woman you're going to want to spend your life with, because she is going to see the value in you for your skills and your talents and your merits over the what can I get out of him approach, which seems to be the default for most more feminine minded women.
Okay, let's wrap up. Again, if anybody wants to talk to someone, if they're contemplating suicide, the number for the suicide prevention hotline is down in the description of the video. I've been Mr. E.
I have been Dalton, the Authenticator, and we have been the Duality of Man.
Thank you guys for listening.